When Daniel Craig was first cast as James Bond, I had some misgivings about it. Then I saw Casino Royale, and overall I was pleased. The film was pretty good, and I thought Daniel Craig, while he didn't really look like Bond, certainly portrayed the right kind of ruthless killer that Bond should be. But even in that first film, there were some things that concerned me. I always look back at this one scene that takes place on a plane. Bond is flying to the poker tournament in Montenegro on a jet, and of course it's got a bar on it, and he's sitting there having a drink alone. And then another character played by Giannini, what is it? Giancarlo Giannini, I think that's the actor's name. He comes up to Bond and says, "What are you drinking?" Bond looks at his drink and says, "I don't know." And then he turns to the bartender and says, "What am I drinking?" And that scene right there really didn't fly with me. I was sitting there shaking my head and thinking, okay, no. Bond would know exactly what is in his drink. Bond is very particular. Bond likes his cocktails a certain way. Bond ties his ties a certain way. Bond irons his clothing a certain way. He's very particular, and he would know exactly what is in his drink. So that scene rang very false to me. But otherwise, I enjoyed Casino Royale. I thought it was a pretty solid Bond film, and it seemed to bode well for future films. Then we got Quantum of Solace, and I think Quantum of Solace is a little underrated. I think because Casino Royale was so widely liked that Quantum of Solace was seen as disappointing as a follow-up. But Quantum of Solace is a decent enough Bond film in itself. Then we got Skyfall. And that is where, in my opinion, this current series of Bond films really began to kind of go off the rails for a couple of reasons. One is that it started touching on this point, and it's a point that has been made in every film since, which is that Bond is basically over the hill and too old for this shit. But more to the point, the plot to Skyfall just didn't make a whole lot of sense. Now, from a technical standpoint, it's a great film. It's well directed, the performances are good, the cinematography is gorgeous. I don't think there's ever been a Bond film that looked better. But Silva, the villain, just his whole plot doesn't make any sense. His whole scheme is to get caught by MI6, and then they try to hack into his computer, which releases a virus into their system, which releases him from his cell. He then escapes from MI6, and then disguises himself as a cop so he can walk into a courtroom and assassinate M while she's in the middle of giving testimony. Okay, but did you really need to be caught? Why not just skip the whole part where you get caught and then put in a jail cell, and then you cross your fingers and hope that they hack into your computer in time for you to get out and then get to the courtroom? I mean, it's just silly. They were obviously trying to imitate The Dark Knight, which had come out a couple of years earlier, and the whole plot in that movie where Joker lets himself get caught and then turns the tables on the cops. But Silva's whole scheme just didn't make any sense. And then after that, we got Spectre, and Spectre in many ways was kind of the same way. Technically, a really well-made film. Directed well, cinematography's great, the performances are good for the most part, but again, Blofeld's whole scheme doesn't really make a whole lot of sense. He and Bond are adopted brothers, and because he's this bizarre sociopath, he has despised Bond his whole life. Blofeld murdered his parents, and even though he hates Bond, he never killed Bond. And for some reason, even though he's hated Bond his whole life and always wanted to kill him, he waits until Bond is an adult and a trained government assassins to try and take him out. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And now we get No Time to Die, which is supposed to be Daniel Craig's final film as James Bond. And another thing that these Bond films, I think, have taken a step wrong with is trying to make it all into one long story, where there are plot elements that connect all the films together. And it's been done retroactively. It's clear it wasn't intended from the beginning, and as a result, I think trying to tie this all together has been kind of clumsy. But anyway, let's talk about No Time to Die. So we start the film with a flashback. There's a house by a lake in the middle of the woods somewhere. It's winter, so the lake is frozen over. And we see a little girl in the home, and she goes to her mother, who is kind of on the couch, and her mother appears to be kind of drunk. And the mother says, "Do you know what your father does?" And the girl says, "Yes, he's a doctor." And the mother says, "Nuh-uh." She laughs and says, "No, your father's a killer. He kills people." And the girl says, "No, that's not true." Then a guy shows up at the house wearing a parka and wearing some kind of a kabuki mask. He confronts the mother and says that, your husband killed my family. Where is he? The mother says, "I don't know." So he kills the mother. The girl runs upstairs to hide. The man comes upstairs looking for the girl. But the girl has a gun, and she unloads about 5 or 6 rounds into his chest. He falls over the balcony down to the floor below. Then the girl drags the guy's body out of the house, but then he wakes up. Apparently he was wearing body armor. The girl panics, and she flees and runs out onto the frozen lake. The man comes out after her. The girl falls through the ice and gets trapped underneath it. The man raises his weapon, and it looks like he's going to kill the girl, but instead he shoots the ice apart, and then he reaches in and saves the girl. We then cut to Madeleine Swan, the woman that, of course, Bond fell in love with in the last film, and she's swimming in the ocean. And we see that Bond and Madeleine are on a vacation. I don't think it's a honeymoon exactly, but it has that kind of feel to it. Presumably, this takes place shortly after the end of the last film. They're vacationing in Italy, and they come to this Italian town to stay at a hotel for the night. And we find out that this is the town where Vesper Lynd, the woman, of course, Bond fell in love with back in Casino Royale, is buried. And apparently it was Madeleine Swan's idea to come to this town. Because, that's obviously something a woman would do. Hey, let's go for a vacation. I know a great place. Let's go to the town where your ex-girlfriend is buried. Anyway, Bond goes to visit Vesper's grave. But while he's there, a bomb goes off that's hidden in the crypt. She's not in a grave, really. She's in kind of a crypt, and it blows up right in his face. He's like 2 feet away, and even though it completely destroys this stone acropolis, he comes away with minor injuries somehow. He goes back to the hotel, although on the way he gets attacked by Spectre goons. He confronts Madeleine, and she claims not to know what's going on. They get into Bond's car, which is the DB5, the Aston Martin DB5, the classic one. And then the Hydra men start coming out of the woodwork and attack them. A pretty cool chase sequence ensues. It's really well done. And in the end, Bond and Madeleine manage to get away from the Hydra guys. They go to the train station. Bond makes it clear he no longer trusts Madeleine. He thinks that she led him here and into this trap on purpose. He puts her on the train and basically says, "So long." And then we go to the opening credit sequence, which is, it's so-so. You remember the old days when the Bond credit sequences would have all these sexy women in it, hot women gyrating and dancing? Yeah, we don't really get that anymore. Then we skip to the present day, and we see a group of men with weapons, kind of an assault team, who infiltrate a high-rise building in the middle of London. Now, it turns out that this building houses a bioweapons lab of some kind. There's a Russian scientist who's working in this lab, and he's there to help these guys get this weapon. Now, this bioweapons lab is in a high-rise building right in the middle of London. If you're going to have a bioweapons facility, shouldn't it be maybe not in a big population center? It's off the books. The prime minister doesn't even know that it's out there, doesn't even know this exists. So again, why put it in a big population center? And also, for a top secret bioweapons facility, not much security, really. The bad guys pretty much just cut through a window and walk right in. They managed to steal this substance, which looks kind of like a silvery fluid. And they take the Russian scientist with them. They kill everyone else in the lab, and then they blow the lab up. Which, again, since this is a bioweapons facility, wouldn't that release a lot of toxins and stuff into the middle of town? But for some reason, that just doesn't happen. Then we go to M, and M and some of his people are watching the news coverage of the explosions, and M is very cagey about the whole thing. He's clearly hiding something. The Prime Minister calls and wants to talk to him, but M tells one of his people to say, just tell the Prime Minister it was a gas leak. Then we go to Jamaica, and we find Bond is there living in retirement because he's retired again. This is like, what, the second or third time? So Bond comes back from a fishing trip to find a used cigar in his place. He recognizes the cigar. He goes into town, and he winds up meeting with Felix Leiter, the American CIA agent that he's worked with in the past. Leiter tells him about the explosion and the bioweapons facility in London, and that the CIA knows there's some kind of top secret bioweapon that's been stolen. The CIA wants to stop it before it's used, and that they believe Spectre is behind it. They know that Spectre is having some big meeting in Cuba. A bunch of Spectre bigwigs are going to be there. Felix says, I know you're retired, but they try to recruit Bond into helping them on this case. And by the way, Felix also has another guy with him named Logan Ash, a younger guy who's kind of in training or something, I don't know, but the guy's very squirrely, and it's obvious that this guy's going to turn out to be a double agent or something. Bond initially refuses. Then he bumps into Nomi, a Jamaican woman. After he comes out of the club, he finds that his vehicle won't start. Then Nomi drives up on a moped and offers to give him a ride. So he says sure. So he hops onto her little moped, and she gives him a ridesy back to his place. Back at his place, Nomi tells him that she's actually a British agent. And it turns out that not only is she a British agent, she is the new 007. She warns Bond not to get involved. If he does, then she'll have to take him out. The following day, Bond calls M and talks to him about the bioweapons incident. It turns out Bond knows about this bioweapon, which we later find out is called Hercules. Bond chides M for letting this happen, and then M rebuffs Bond and tells him to stay out of it. Subsequently, Bond contacts Felix Leiter and says, okay, I'm in, I'll help you. Felix tells Bond that the big meeting's going to take place in Cuba, so Bond hops in a sailboat and sails to Cuba. And bizarrely, even though he goes there in a sailboat while Nomi flies there in a plane, they both arrive at the same time. I mean, seriously, exactly at the same time. Bond gets out of his boat and is walking up the pier and looks to his right, and there's Nomi getting out of her plane. Bond meets up with a CIA agent named Paloma, played by Ana de Armas, who looks absolutely gorgeous, by the way. She gives him a tuxedo, and then they attempt to infiltrate the Spectre meeting. While he's at the meeting, Blofeld's voice comes over a loudspeaker and welcomes James to the party, and it looks like this whole thing is going to be a trap. Then some kind of a substance is sprayed out onto the crowd below. Blofeld tells the crowd, don't worry, it won't hurt you. This is just for James. But then Bond is fine while everyone else at the party starts to die, all the Spectre people. Now, the Russian scientist is there, so Bond and Paloma try to grab the Russian scientist, but Nomi shows up and she's trying to grab him too. She gets him initially and takes off with him, while Bond and Paloma fight the Spectre goons. Now, when Bond first meets Paloma, she's all awkward and kind of shy and says that she's only been on the job 3 weeks, and she's really, I really hope I can do a good job. But of course, once the action starts, she starts mowing down bad guys like she's John Wick. Anyway, Bond and Paloma manage to get the Russian scientist away from Nomi. Then Bond takes the scientist, he goes to the pier, and he takes Nomi's seaplane. And even though Nomi is a secret agent and you would think would know about security, she just leaves her seaplane sitting at the dock, unlocked with the keys in the ignition. So Bond hops in the plane, starts the plane up, and flies away. He flies out to sea, where he rendezvous with a fishing boat. On the fishing boat, Felix and Logan are there waiting for Bond. He hands over the scientist to them, but of course Bond wants answers, so he starts interrogating the scientist. Logan Ash tells Bond to stop questioning the scientist. Eventually he pulls a gun, and of course he's not really a CIA agent, or he's a double agent. He shoots Felix in the stomach, and then he manages to trap Felix and Bond below decks. Then he sets a bomb. He takes the Russian scientist, hops in the plane, and flies away while the bomb blows up and the ship starts to sink. Felix dies from his wounds, and Bond is barely able to make it out alive, and he's eventually found by a passing ship. Bond then goes to London, where he confronts M. That's when we find out about Hercules. Hercules is not a bioweapon necessarily, it's a nanoweapon. It's a nanobot virus that can be keyed to attack a specific DNA sequence. That is, you can use it to target a specific individual that matches the specific DNA code that it is keyed to. But of course, the nanobots can be reprogrammed, not necessarily to attack an individual, but to attack, say, an entire bloodline, because, of course, people in specific bloodlines will share certain DNA sequences. Not only that, but you can broaden it even more to attack, say, entire ethnicities. Bond scolds M for going through with the project and not canceling it, and M just kind of shrugs and says, well, it was never meant to get out of control like this. And I kind of like this as a plot device in a way. It just seems totally like something that a government would do, to create something like this and let it get out of control. Like, oh, I don't know, say maybe doing gain-of-function research on coronaviruses. Because, hey, it's not like the coronavirus is ever going to escape from the lab and get out and spread around the world and cause a pandemic, now is it? Bond tells M that Blofeld must be behind the whole thing because Blofeld was speaking to him. But of course, that shouldn't be possible. Blofeld has been in prison since the last movie. Bond insists that it must be him, but M says that's impossible. Only one person has access to him, his psychiatrist. And of course, who's his psychiatrist? Madeleine Swan is. Which really doesn't make a whole lot of sense. Again, the last time Bond saw Madeleine, he basically broke up with her because he thought she was a Spectre agent. He did never call MI6 and warn them, hey, I think Madeleine might be working for Spectre. No, apparently he didn't. In fact, not only that, we learned from M that Bond really never even officially retired. He just left and never came back, just like he did in Skyfall. In fact, at one point, M says, after you dropped off the radar, we assumed you were dead. Well, why would you presume Bond is dead? Hasn't you assumed he was dead or thought he was dead at least a couple of times before and he turned up alive again? And it's also kind of dumb because MI6 thought he was dead and had no clue he was even alive. Meanwhile, the CIA knew he's alive and knew exactly where he was. Bond goes to visit Blofeld and question him, and of course, Bond arrives at the exact same time that Madeleine does, and they have an uncomfortable confrontation. Now, prior to going to see Blofeld for her appointment, Madeleine is confronted by a guy named Safin, and we learn that Safin is the guy that killed her mother back during the beginning of the film. He gives her something that appears to be like a perfume spray and tells her to wear it when she has her meeting with Blofeld. So she sprays some on her wrists prior to the meeting. Now, when they go into the cell, she and Bond get into an uncomfortable exchange. Bond at one point grabs her by the arm. She pulls her arms away and warns Bond that he doesn't understand what's really going on, and then she leaves. Then Bond tries to interrogate Blofeld, and Blofeld really just kind of talks in vague generalities about keeping secrets and about how destructive they can be to relationships, blah, blah, blah. At one point, Bond gets pissed, and he starts to strangle Blofeld. Security comes in to stop him, and he lets Blofeld go, but then Blofeld dies anyway. It turns out he died from the Hercules virus. Bond had the Hercules virus on him when he touched Blofeld, and they figure out that it must have come from Madeleine. Bond goes to that little cabin out in the forest by the lake that we saw at the beginning of the film to find Madeleine, while Nomi goes off to try and find Logan Ash and therefore find the scientist and hopefully Hercules. Bond finds Madeleine at the cabin, but surprise, surprise, he also finds, and this is the big plot twist, he finds that Madeleine has a daughter. Of course, Madeleine immediately insists that the daughter isn't his, but Bond tells them that they're in danger and they need to go, so they hop in a vehicle, and as they're driving away down the highway, they're passed by a couple of black SUVs that are heading towards the cabin. The SUVs turn around and chase after them, which eventually leads out into the middle of the woods where Bond and Madeleine abandon their vehicle. And I don't know, maybe I'm not smart, but it seems to me if you're being chased by a bunch of people in SUVs and motorcycles, maybe then trying to escape on foot really isn't the best thing to do. So far in this movie, we really haven't seen a lot of these sort of feminist woke stuff that the marketing and a lot of the advanced press suggested was going to be there. But at this point, we finally do get something that really kind of bugged me. So they're fleeing from the vehicle, and Bond pulls out his weapon and he hands it to Madeleine, and then he picks up the daughter and carries her, playing the mommy role. And I'm thinking, okay, well, James, you're the government assassin. You're the expert with a gun. Shouldn't you have the gun? They find an abandoned little hunting cabin of some kind out in the middle of the woods, and Bond tells them to stay there while he goes out and he starts killing the bad guys. At one point, he derails a vehicle, which flips over, and it turns out that Logan Ash was in the vehicle and Bond kills him. Then Bond hears gunfire and he returns to the cabin to find that Madeleine and the daughter are gone. They've been taken by the bad guy Safin, played by Rami Malek. Bond goes back to London, and they learn that Safin has taken them to a small island that's in some disputed waters in between Russia and Japan. Apparently, during World War II, Japan used this place as a weapons manufacturing facility, and they guess that that's where he's got the Hercules virus. So Bond and Nomi, or excuse me, 007, they get in this glider that can turn into a submarine, and they travel to the island and they infiltrate it. They eventually get to a room with some scientists who are working on the Hercules virus. They plant a bunch of bombs and are planning to blow the whole facility up, but of course Safin is on to them. Bond decides to go to try and find Madeleine and the girl and tells Nomi if he isn't back soon to just blow the place up. The problem is they don't have enough explosives to blow up everything. They're mass manufacturing this Hercules virus, and they just don't have enough bombs to get rid of it all. Now, Madeleine manages to free herself because, of course, we can't have Bond saving the damsel, can we? But Bond eventually does find Safin, who has the daughter. They have a confrontation, and then Bond kills Safin's henchman, but Safin gets away. And then, even though he's holding the little girl hostage, at some point he just lets her go, apparently, for reasons. Bond helps Nomi and Madeleine and the daughter escape on a boat, but he stays behind and orders a missile strike on the facility in order to make sure that all of the Hercules virus is destroyed. The problem is it's underground, so Bond has to open these missile silo doors so that the missiles can hit them. So he goes up to the control room and he opens the doors and then starts to leave, but then the missile doors start to close again. He returns to reopen them, and then Safin shows up without all of his henchmen, who are suddenly missing for some reason. He shoots Bond and wounds him seriously. Bond breaks Safin's arm and disarms him and then kills him. He goes up and reopens the missile silo doors again, and then climbs up to the roof, and then he contacts Madeleine and says goodbye to her, and he apologizes for being a jerk and being a man, I guess. And then the missiles come down and blow up the entire facility, killing Bond as well. Yes, Bond dies at the end of the movie. So overall, No Time to Die wasn't as bad as I thought it was going to be. With all the press and the media and the focus on the character of Nomi, or excuse me, 007, I really thought this movie was going to be excruciating. It was going to be another Last Jedi, a movie that takes a beloved male character and basically denigrates him, insults him, and then in the end disposes of him. But it's not really like that. And a lot of the scolding or denigrating of Bond that was hinted at in the press coverage leading up to the movie really isn't there. If it ever was there, then it was disposed of or removed in subsequent cuts. My guess is that if it was there, it probably didn't go over well with test audiences, and it was cut out. In fact, Nomi, 007, really isn't even in the movie that much, and she really isn't that much of a factor. The press coverage has really made her seem a lot more important to the movie than she really is. If you've seen the trailers, then you've pretty much seen her whole role in the film. In fact, Ana de Armas as Paloma makes a much bigger impression than Nomi does. So overall, is the movie woke? No, not really. It certainly has some bits here and there that concern me, but this movie is not really what the pre-release press kind of hyped it to be. Having said that, the film does have some problems. Frankly, the same problems that the previous couple of movies had. Namely, that the film has a bloated, meandering plot, and the villain's big master plan doesn't really make any sense. In fact, I'm not really even sure what the villain's plan here is supposed to be. Initially, Safin seizes control of the Hercules virus so that he can use it to attack Spectre. Because when he was young, Spectre killed his family. That makes sense. But in the final act, we find out that he's planning to engineer the virus so that it will kill millions of people and then release it. Why is he doing this exactly? Don't know. Couldn't tell you. Rami Malek plays Safin, and he's certainly a capable actor, but he's kind of wasted here. He's barely in the movie, and when he does appear on screen, he just has the same kind of expression on his face, and he delivers all his lines in the same kind of hoarse whisper with this thick accent, so that frankly, I couldn't understand half of what the guy was saying anyway. So personally, I'll give the film, let's say, 3 out of 5 vodka martinis. How about that? It's not a bad movie, it's just not a particularly good Bond movie. And maybe it's just as well that this is the last one, because Craig seems to be pretty much just going through the motions for most of this movie. In fact, the whole movie kind of has this feeling to it that everyone involved just kind of wants to get it over with. But at least now we don't have to listen to Craig bitch and moan about how much he hates playing Bonds, so there is that. Perhaps more concerning is, where does the franchise go from here? Personally, I wouldn't be surprised if this is the last time we see Bond played by a straight white male. The next Bond is probably going to be a person of color, or if it's going to be a white guy, probably be gay or trans or bi or something like that. Now, I know a lot of people are upset by the death of Bond in this movie. It really didn't bother me that much, partly because, to be honest, I really don't think of Craig's Bond as being Ian Fleming's Bond, to be honest. Ian Fleming's Bond pretty much died with Pierce Brosnan. This is another Bond in some alternate universe. He doesn't look like Bond, he doesn't really act like Bond. So I'm not really that bothered by his death, because to me it's like, it's not really Bond dying, it's just this other character that has Bond's name. However, in a few years, I may be looking back on Craig's tenure as Bond and wishing we could get it back, because I have a feeling what comes next is probably not going to be something I'm going to like. Anyway, let me know what you thought of the film. Did you enjoy No Time to Die? Did you enjoy Craig as Bond? Are you glad to see it end, or do you wish he'd be sticking around? Let me know in the comments, and while you're at it, please do sub to the channel and hit the bell for notifications, and I will see you all next time. Thanks for watching.